Much. And now it's a pleasure to invite my colleague Ron Brownstein to the stage. Ron is a senior editor of The Atlantic, and he leads our Next America work. Ron is going to kick off the morning by sharing the results of an Atlantic Media Pearson poll, which tracks how people feel about opportunity in this country. The poll is hot off the press, and Ron, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Margaret. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. As Margaret mentioned, I'm Ron Brownstein. I am senior editor at The Atlantic, but also the founder of our Next America project, which has been our attempt since 2011 to explore how growing diversity is changing the national agenda in all aspects of American life. The schools, the workplace, communities, politics. You may have seen a little bit of that politics thing in the last few months. But today, we are here to talk about what it means, particularly for the workforce. And we are very pleased that Pearson has partnered with us for I think, a pretty groundbreaking national poll exploring Americans' views about both the personal choices and the public policy choices that they believe will give them as individuals, and also the next generation, the best chance to succeed. So the Atlantic Media Pearson Opportunity Poll was conducted by Princeton Survey Research Associates International. We surveyed 1,276 adults living in the United States by landline and cell phone from February 10 through February 25. It includes oversamples of African Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanics. Interviews were conducted in English and Spanish, and because we have those oversamples, it allows us to analyze views in these distinct groups with greater precision than you usually get in public polling. The sample margin of error is plus or minus 4.3 percentage points. So what did we learn? Well, the first thing we learned is that workers are mostly confident about their skills, but Hispanics express the most concern. When we ask people, how would you rank your skills in your current field? You can see the distribution there. Among whites, significant confidence that they are above average. This is kind of the Lake Wobegon question, where everyone is above average. But as you'll see, it is significantly lower for the different racial and ethnic groups, particularly among Hispanics, where only 33% say their skills are above average, 48% saying only average. A similar question kind of produces the same sort of split. How concerned are you about your skills becoming obsolete? We asked over the next 5 years and over the next 10 years. And as you'll see, a majority of Hispanics in particular are concerned that their skills will grow obsolete over the next 10 years, significant portions for Asian Americans and African Americans as well. A second major finding, consistently on a whole series of different questions, workers look first to employers as the best source of upgrading their skills. When we asked, what would you do? What would you be likely to do in order to improve your skills at work? You can see many more people picked availing themselves of training from their employer than any other option. The skills, credential, or certification was next, returning for a formal degree at about 2/5, government training program about 39%. Interestingly, and I think this may reflect some of the broader attitudes about opportunity in the workplace that the poll evinced on a whole series of questions, African American and Hispanic respondents were significantly more likely than white respondents to look at some of those options beyond the workplace for improving their skills. Similar kind of result. Who do you think is most likely to develop the best new thinking, the best new ideas for helping workers upgrade their skills? Again, the initial inclination of most, a plurality, was to look at their employer. Then we get into some of the broader choices and collective institutions in society. And we see that Americans are split on two critical questions: whether schools are equipping young people to succeed in post-secondary education, and whether young people need a college degree to succeed in the modern economy. Take a look at this. We've seen a significant decline since 2012 in an earlier version of the Next America poll in the share of Americans who say their neighborhood schools are preparing children for college work. And on this question, there is a substantial racial divide. Now, do you think young people today need a 4-year degree to be successful? A narrow majority says yes. 53%, 46% say no. This has been pretty consistent. We've been asking this question in Next America polling going back to 2012, and the numbers vary a little, but it's almost always a 50-50 split. But again, significant racial differences on this. Among whites and African Americans, pretty much an even split. Among Hispanics and Asian Americans, a clear preponderance, 2/3 to 3/4, saying that yes, young people do need a college degree to succeed. This is really interesting. Americans are more likely to see barriers of class than of race. So what do we mean by that? We asked respondents whether different groups had equal, better, or worse access to employment opportunity than other groups. African Americans at 55% were the only group where a majority of the group itself, let me say this so it doesn't tangle, it was the only group in which a majority of the group itself said that that group had worse opportunities, worse access to opportunity than other Americans. 55% of African Americans. Among Hispanics, a substantial number, 41%, but less than a majority. Asian Americans, only 9%, and as you can see, whites, only 8% say that they believe they have worse opportunity, worse access to opportunity than other Americans. By the way, we didn't have enough to measure them as a subgroup, but the group that most of the public overall, the largest share of the public overall said had less access to employment opportunity than others were Muslim Americans at 38%. So while the results on class were mixed, where you had a majority of African Americans, a significant minority of Hispanics, but not large numbers of Asian Americans or whites saying they have worse opportunity than other groups to employment, on class, I think this is a pretty interesting finding. 44% of those polled, only 44%, agree that anyone who works hard has a fair chance to succeed and live a comfortable life in today's America. A majority of those polls say today's economy mostly rewards the rich, and it's difficult for average people to get ahead. And as you see on the next slide, again, interestingly, similar to the previous results, Hispanic and Asian Americans are the most likely to think anyone who works hard still has a fair chance to succeed. African Americans the least likely, but a majority of whites also questioning whether the American dream still of upward mobility is still available for all Americans, regardless of where they start. Now, there is broad support for public policies to expand access to education. But when we get to questions about expanding access to higher education, as we'll see in a minute, more of the traditional partisan, racial, and generational divides that increasingly define our politics resurface. Expanding access to preschool, something you've been talking about in Texas, which San Antonio has done on a city basis, where the state took some steps toward in the budget last year. 76% of all Americans think universal preschool for 4-year-olds would provide children with a better chance to succeed. Only 20% say it would move children out of the house and away from family at too young an age. And this is about as broad a consensus as you can get in public policy. 88% of African Americans, 76% of Hispanics, 73% of whites, 79% of women, 73% of men, 86% of Democrats, 73% of independents, 65% of Republicans all agree that expanding preschool would expand opportunity. When you get to the question that has often been discussed this year on the campaign trail, should government provide access to free public college because a degree is essential to success? 51% yes. 44% say it is too expensive for the government to guarantee free public college education. Families and students should contribute. And here on this, in contrast to the pre-K, you see many of the more traditional divides resurface, with African Americans and Hispanics, as is often the case, much more supportive of collective action through government than whites. Asian Americans dividing easily. Democrats, 70 to 27, yes, government should provide free public college. Republicans, 73 to 22, no. A clear generational split. 64% of millennials say yes. It drops to 52% on Generation X, 47% among boomers, 31% in the silent generation. Adults who say they intend to vote for Hillary Clinton in a choice with Donald Trump, 66-30 yes. Those who would support Trump, 28-67 no. When you ask, though, would you be willing to pay more in federal taxes for the government to provide free college education, 74% of those who supported the idea initially say yes, 25% no. That leaves you with 38% saying they would support this idea and pay the taxes for it, 13% support the idea but would not pay the taxes for it, and 44% say it's too expensive in the first place. A final question that I think, again, shows the priority that people place on education at this point in our history. We asked, what do you think would do the most to improve the economy in your community? And we gave people kind of four big choices that have been in the public policy debate. Education topped the list with a 40% plurality, cutting taxes for individuals and business, 24%, raising taxes on foreign products, 17%, reducing the number of immigrant workers entering the U.S. Groups that were most likely to pick education: Asian Americans, 69%, Democrats, 56%, millennials, 55%, African Americans, 53%, women and Hispanics, both 43%. Taxes were the top choice only for two groups: Republicans and members of Generation X. Interestingly, in kind of measuring where the parties are, 20% of Republicans picked raising taxes on foreign products, tariffs. Only 17% of Democrats picked that. Republicans were twice as likely, at 17% to 9%. To pick restricting immigration. So that gives you a kind of a broad sense of the poll. We have a series of stories out on theatlantic.com this week going through the results in detail. And I would say that as a kind of summary about what I think we learned is that Americans have gotten the memo. What you earn depends on what you learn in an information age. An overwhelming percentage of those we polled say they believe that if they got more training, they would earn more. On the other hand, the poll makes clear that they see a lot of barriers to actually obtaining that training. And the paradox, and the paradox that really sets up the conversation we're going to have today, is that from many angles, those who would benefit the most from the training tend to be also the ones who feel training broadly defined, by which I'm meaning literally skills training, but also more education credentials. Those who might benefit more from more credentials and training also tend to be the ones who feel that they have the biggest barriers to obtaining it. And that, I think, is a fundamental challenge that we face at a time when our workforce is inexorably growing more diverse, and experts have projected that all of the net growth in the workforce between now and 2030 will be workers of color. So now we're going to talk about how Texas in particular, which is at the forward edge of this change, a state where a clear majority of the public school system was already kids of color, and a significant majority of the workers entering the workforce are workers of color. So we want to talk about this from many different angles, but we're going to start this morning by bringing the conversation to a more local level. Mayor Steve